Who are the kings and the kingmakers? Let's get dialed in. Who or what is Texans for Lawsuit Reform, better known as TLR? If you're like most Texans, you've probably never heard of them, and that is exactly what they want. Texas Scorecard founder Michael Quinn Sullivan released a documentary just yesterday called Hubris, the Texas Kingmakers, in which he shines a light on their sinister influence in the Austin swamp. Michael Quinn Sullivan joins me now. Michael, welcome back to Texas Talkin.
Thanks, Shiloh. Great to be with you.
It's good to have you, sir. I watched Hubris, Texas Kingmakers yesterday, shortly after it was released. I found it to be both illuminating and absolutely relevant to the dynamics of Texas politics. And I want to strongly encourage our viewers to watch it in full themselves. That being stated, could you briefly tell us what Texans for Lawsuit Reform is, and perhaps more importantly, why people should care?
Yeah, look, Texans for Lawsuit Reform started back in 1994 when there was a very real problem. The plaintiffs' bar in Texas was out of control. Lawsuit abuse was out of control. That was the era of, spilt coffee, men an $8 million reward. That was an era in Texas when a majority of Texas counties didn't have OBGYNs in them. This is when you had Texaco push into bankruptcy over what we now recognize fully as a frivolous lawsuit. It was a horrible, horrible time. And those plaintiffs' lawyers were all Democrats, okay? So Texans for Lawsuit Reform was started to bring some sensibility to the tort environment, and they did a great job. Whatever they have become, you can't take away from the fact that they did a very critical and important thing for Texas back in the mid 90s through 2003, 2005 timeframe. Since then, though, they amassed all this power. They've kind of morphed into being this pro-business group, a kind of chamber of commerce enforcers, if you will, who are much more interested in preserving the status quo, much more interested in helping corporations take advantage of Texans than they are in advancing the cause of liberty. They're thought of as a Republican group, Shiloh, only because they are pro-business. But in fact, what we've uncovered, we talk about in Hubris, is TLR is the driving force in terms of money behind Republicans in the Texas House letting Democrats chair important policy committees. Now, to be real clear, TLR does not want any Democrat chairing the committees that are important to TLR. They only want bona fide Republicans at those committees. For everything else, they're happy. Pro-life legislation dies because they're okay with Democrats chairing those committees, and the list goes on.
I thought you raised a very important point when you talked about in the documentary how TLR has sort of branded itself as pro-business. But do you think it would be a fair characterization when TLR says that to really say that what they are is pro-corporate welfare?
Yeah, look, they're very much corporatists. They say pro-business. I use pro-business. When conservatives talk, when we talk about things, talk about being capitalists, we talk about being free market, and that's different than being a corporatist or pro-business, because to your point, that means that you're handing out money to corporations, both in the form of tax abatements, direct welfare payments, or perhaps worse and more insidiously, and this is what we see all the time coming out of Austin, where legislation will be passed that incumbent players in a market area will push for, so they can stop competitors, where they can block a young startup company, a small businessman from getting into their space. It is sinful. It's tyrannical. It is the opposite of free market. It's the opposite of capitalism. It's cronyism, it's corporatism. It's bad stuff.
So why do you think TLR works to advance globalist liberal policies?
Look, I think it's because you have to understand how they started out. Now, the Texas of the early 1990s looks more like California of today than Texas of today. Every statewide official was a Democrat. Both chambers of the legislature were Democrats. And so for TLR to be successful in 1994, they engaged with George W. Bush, who was running for governor. He won, but still had Democrats, House, Democrats, Senate. And so they had to engage with Democrats. And so they would get Democrats who may have been bad on every other Republican issue, every other conservative issue, but they were good on tort stuff. And so they would, help those Democrats get elected, beating out, trial lawyer Democrats. And they kind of stuck with that. They kind of got it in their head. It's kind of like when you see, the old man who is dressed really snazily for 1943, right? He bought his wardrobe in 1943, and he's going to keep wearing that wardrobe no matter what, right? And that's kind of what TLR is like. They're like the old man who just gave up keeping up with with reality at some point 50 years ago. TLR's in the same thing, where they see that the way to maintain the status quo, preserve what they got, is to keep Democrats empowered in the Texas House.
So one of the commonalities that I've seemed to pick up on throughout the course of not only watching the documentary, but being an observer of Texas politics, is that it would appear that in most instances, when TLR is so aggressively opposed to Republican challengers, especially from the conservative grassroots, it's that they stand in opposition to what many of us would call social conservatism. In other words, conservative positions on social issues. Why do you think that is? What's their goal here?
Well, what drives a lot of that is think of Google, think of the BlackRock, think of all these big multinational corporations, all of which with their DEI statements and their CSG statements, they've all convinced themselves that the way to be successful is to be a leftist, and they hate capitalism, they hate America, they hate the things that us, the dirty, unwashed masses believe. And if you're TLR and you're trying to raise money for those people, if those are actually your people, yes. The head of Google is more who you want to be aligned with than some precinct chair from Orange County or something, right? You don't want to hang out with those people. So it's a yeah, exactly. They're the people you and I celebrate, are the people that they despise. Let's kind of talk about kind of a very specific thing here with your question. Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas, they never liked Ken Paxton, despite him always voting with them, because Ken Paxton was very friendly with the social conservatives. He was very friendly with Donald Trump. They didn't like any of that stuff, but they tolerated it right up until the moment when Ken Paxton, as the Attorney General of Texas, started going after Google, started going after the woke banks, and started going after big tech, going after big pharma. That's when I said, wait a second, because in the worldview of TLR, who is pro-business, a business can do no wrong. We talk about this in the documentary with Ken Paxton. It talks about how his job as the AG is to help create a better environment for business to be conducted. But he's also there to make sure citizens aren't run over by big corporations who engage in fraudulent behavior. TLR, under the working as they do as kind of the enforcement arm for the crony Chamber of Commerce, they wanted to unravel those kind of reforms so that the Attorney General of Texas can't go after fraud. We joke that a little fraud is good for business. It might be good for business, but it's really bad for people. And that's what TLR has been trying to do the past few years.
You just brought up a company that actually leads into the next question I planned on asking you, and that is, have you investigated whether BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street Capital have any ties to TLR?
That question's actually been raised, and one we continue to kind of look for and look at. You go about trying to tell the misdeeds of an organization that's been around for 30 years and 15 of them been doing bad stuff. You have to start cutting some things, right, to make it watchable. But look, the part of the challenge for us is TLR is really multiple entities, because they've got political action committees. and then they have corporate interests where they pay people out of and things like that. So what we don't know what we can't see. What we can't see is who is subsidizing the under the C on the 501c4, 501c3 enterprises. What big companies are spending money there that frees up money in other places to fund PACs? So those are so we don't know. We have been told that that they very much have their handout. TLR has their handout looking for cash from the Vanguards and the Black Rocks and the Googles and all those and all that crowd. And so then it makes sense when you look at why is a Texas-based group focused on civil justice? Why are they advocating for changes that really only benefit big out of state multinational corporations?
The 1%. And the reason why or less than 1%, really. The reason why I asked that question is because the one word that kept coming to mind as I watched that documentary last night was globalism. And it would seem to me that much of what TLR is doing almost perfectly aligns itself with these globalist agendas that we see from the big woke corporations. And it's almost like they're all reading from the same sheet of music. And that is, in my estimation, because in many instances they are. That is
Right.
BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street Capital. Most of these huge corporations are owned by either one or all three. The bulk of the shares are owned by either one or all three of those three organizations. And so my fear is that there could possibly be something much more nefarious going on here than even the documentary was able to bring to light, which shed light on quite a bit. So I just hope that. Go ahead.
And then look to your point, Shiloh. One of the things that we uncovered, and then again, you don't always get to delve as deeply as you want into some things, but the very tight relationship between TLR and Karl Rove. Karl Rove, who makes no bones about his dislike and distrust of the conservative grassroots. He doesn't like all these Christians who go out and block walk on pro-life causes. He finds all of the people you and I think of as our friends and our heroes as dirty people he doesn't want to be around, right? He's much more interested in the the Davos crowd than he is in the crowd, down at the local coffee shop. And that's who they use to do a lot of their dirty work, as we demonstrated at least in one instance in the documentary.
So Dade Phelan is backed by TLR and has been for quite some time. Some might argue even controlled by them. I live, as you know, in Phelan's district, and so do many of the viewers who watch this show on a regular basis. What is your message, Michael, to our fellow Texans here in District 21?
Well, I will echo. I asked that question. I asked the question to Ken Paxton. What should voters think when they see that their state representative is supported by TLR? And Ken Paxton's response was right on the money to your question. He said, what it probably means is they don't actually represent the district. That they are supported by TLR because they will support TLR's agenda, not that they care about the actual agenda of the people in that district. And look, whether you live in House District 21 or wherever you are in the state, you and I need to do a lot better job of asking questions of state reps, particularly incumbents. I see you're getting all this money from this group that I know nothing about, that has offices in Austin and in Houston. Why? What are you doing that's making them give you millions of dollars? Why aren't you asking us in the district for money? Why are you more interested in being beholden financially to this group that runs contra to the Republican Party platform rather than being beholden to us here at home? Those are the kind of questions we need to do a better job of asking our legislators.
Absolutely. Folks, you can find Hubris, the Texas Kingmakers, on YouTube. It's also all over social media right now, particularly on X, formerly known as Twitter. If you get on there, I'm sure you'll find it. Give Michael Quinn Sullivan a follow on his X platform. And I'd like to make a recommendation to all of my viewers to do something else that I do, which is sign up for the Texas Minute. It's a summary of all things relevant in Texas news that I get every morning at about 6 o'clock, and it'll get you dialed in. Michael, My list of heroes is a short one, my friend, but you are most certainly on it. And I want to thank you again for what you're doing.
You're very kind, Charlotte. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Texas.